What did you do for your birthday?
Nothing, to be
Oh,
honest.
let's go out and do something.
Wrote
Well,
stories.
we were working on these stories. We're live. But yeah, we've been working on these Janet stories the last 48 hours. I mean, it's taken a lot of time.
Oh, yeah.
Both of us have been up till probably midnight or 2, and
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, there's stories that we have to get right. You know what I mean? We have to take the time to do them right. I think they're incredibly important stories. The public has a right to know, but it was really important to us to seek as much corroboration as we possibly could, and we're still doing that. We're still doing that. We didn't think we could wait because, I mean, the public has a right to know, but it's a very time-consuming process, investigative reporting.
Yeah. You have to get everything
All right,
out. And I'm glad that you were able to get it out because early voting starts soon.
True. We're not going to rush it for that. We're going to put it out when we think it's, good to go. But yeah. So, I mean, should we recap for people maybe what?
Yeah, let me do an intro. We usually give it. We stay on for a minute, let people come on, and then we'll give an intro, and we'll do it. So, yeah, welcome. This is Wisconsin Right Now, Uncensored, our podcast, episode number 3. I'm Jim Pivovarchuk with my co-host, co-editor Jessica McBride, Scarlett Johnson, and our guest today is Fond du Lac County District Attorney and former AG candidate Eric Toney. Welcome, Eric. Glad you could join us.
Absolutely. Nowhere else I'd rather be helping celebrate Jessica's birthday with all of you in a podcast.
I was gonna say before we got started, we gotta wish Jessica a happy birthday.
Where's my cake, you guys?
We'll get you a virtual cake.
Eric and I
talked.
Where's my virtual cake?
Yeah.
Oh, Tim Jobs said happy 29th. Yeah. Well, it's really 34, but
34.
We can pretend I'm 29. I'm kidding. I'm not 34 either, but we'll keep that to, secret.
I mean, I happen to know how old you are, but I've been around.
I'm older than you by like 3 months.
I was going to say I've been around the sun enough times. I mean, not as many times as you to know better than ever tell a woman say a woman's age. So
I think Eric's the baby of the grid here.
Yeah, he is. He's the baby.
Eric's the future of the Republican Party. It's the farm team.
Oh, we've got a lot of great people out there.
It's actually good to have some young blood in the party, though. Eric, and that's why the results of the AG race didn't go the way you and we hoped. But I feel like you're so young; you have plenty of time to take another shot at it, and to help forge the path forward for the Republican Party and conservatives. So
definitely.
Yeah, I mean, it was I know why I got into the race, and apart from that, it was a great experience. I met so many amazing people along the way, but I can tell you, as frustrating as things can look for us, the future of our party is bright with some of the people that we have that are out there that are up and coming, and we're certainly losing some of these elections, but it's not because of our ideas and our values. We're just getting out organized, and that's something that we can change. And despite getting out organized, we're only losing by relatively small margins, and so we have to tighten the screws on those things, and if we do that, we will start winning in Wisconsin. And so we have to start trying to make that effort right now with the Supreme Court race coming up to help make sure that we send Dan Kelly back to the Supreme Court.
Yeah, I agree with you, Eric, completely. I think that we are growing. We're in a series of growing pains right now, and we are learning how to fight this battle in a whole different way.
Speaking of that race, we broke a little bit of news. We're aware of an internal poll. Not allowed to say who it's from, right, Jessica? We haven't been given permission.
Yeah,
on that
right.
yet.
We know who it's from, but we were sworn to secrecy on that part.
Yeah, we can't say, but it's a very good poll that has Dan Kelly down by only 4 points, with 11 points undecided. And some people may look at that like that's bad news, but quite frankly, those numbers are a lot better than what I was thinking they were.
I think that's good news.
Yeah.
Well, I think, polling in Wisconsin has been relatively unreliable, but the big number there is 11% undecided that you just shared. And that's a big number that can be moved with this much time before an election that certainly gives Dan Kelly an opportunity to win. And, I was just at a fundraiser for him in Racine tonight, helping out there and speaking. And one of the things I shared with them, Janet, Judge Protasewicz, she's been beaten before, and it was one of our current Supreme Court justices, Rebecca Bradley, that actually defeated her. I think it's 10 years ago this April in the circuit court race in Milwaukee. So, and that was Milwaukee County. She's been beaten before. It's been done. It can be done. And even, I know this might give some people some heartburn, but when Justice Brian Hagedorn was running, nobody thought he could win, and he still won. And so, as frustrated as it might be for some people, we can win this race. We just have to make sure we do everything we can to help get people out to vote for Dan Kelly.
Yeah.
I mean, you make a good point, and Rebecca Bradley is a fire-breathing conservative, right? And you're right. She defeated Janet back in the day for the Milwaukee County bench. Of course, it was a different era, right? We didn't have Roe v. Wade being overturned. And I think both sides were sort of running different kinds of races back then. Even Rebecca Bradley maybe wasn't running as a fire-breathing conservative for the Milwaukee bench. So sort of a different dynamic at play. But you're right. Janet doesn't have a great track record, of winning elections when she's got a fierce candidate or opponent. I mean, the Brian Hagedorn example is a good one, because when he ran, some people were writing him off, right? When he ran for state Supreme Court, and the liberal media tried to take him out. The left tried to go at him for his Christian beliefs, and they came up short.
And
obviously,
Jessica,
yeah.
Remember, Janet Protasewicz did that too, commenting about the law school that Justice Kelly and Judge Doro went to as well, essentially attacking their Christian values as well. And that's kind of a trend that we've seen from some of these left-wing candidates where, they've done that time and time again. We certainly haven't talked about that as much because there are so many other negatives with Janet Protasewicz, but, the mainstream media at times has seemed pretty tepid to cover those things.
Well, I think it's really important for us to talk about the two big stories that you guys have been able to break, which shows her character, which is not good. In fact, quite bad, and that her temperament is completely inappropriate for someone who we would want to elect to the Wisconsin Supreme Court.
So, yeah, let's talk about those two stories, maybe one at a time, because I think they're both deserving of attention and their own focus. So story one, we reported that Janet Protasewicz's former stepson, a man named Michael Madden, is accusing her, I should say, of physically assaulting his father, her ex-husband. At the time, he was her husband. His name was Patrick Madden. He was sort of an iconic Milwaukee County conservative judge back in the day. They were married for about 9 months in 1997. The stepson, he was in his 30s at the time. It was sort of a weird marriage, to be honest, because Judge Madden was 70 years old and Janet was 34 and an assistant district attorney when they were married. And Michael Madden, the stepson, was, about the same age as Janet, almost exactly, but he was living in the house. And so he told us on video, on the record, with his name attached, that he saw Janet repeatedly physically not punch. She said she didn't punch him, but slap, push, and shove Judge Madden. She said she left injuries on his face, red marks, according to the stepson. And so he very vividly described all of this. We then obtained a point of corroboration from a family friend who told us that the stepson had told him about the alleged abuse back in 1997 when it happened. We know the identity of that man, but he wanted to remain anonymous for very understandable reasons. Jim and I have been working really hard. We have obtained additional corroboration. We don't want to completely give it away because we're still working on that story. You can expect it shortly. But we do have a second eyewitness, and we do have another friend of the now deceased Judge Madden, who can corroborate that, she had heard of this far before the state Supreme Court race. And that'll be breaking soon. So that is story one. Eric, what were your thoughts about that story?
I think it's really quick. I think it's really important for everyone to understand that he was 70 years old, that he was 5'6". He was an older man who was grieving his wife who had just died of cancer. He'd been married to for, how many years? A really long time. And so she kind of swooped in. He's a grieving widower. She kind of and according to the story, seems that she took advantage of his situation, was opportunistic in this marriage, and then abused this kind, not gentle old man, much 5'6", unable to defend himself. And that's her character. That's who she was. How old was she? 36 years old?
34.
34.
So, a couple things kind of stand out to me. And anytime you go back to an allegation that's so old, it's certainly not something generally that can be proven if you don't have some type of documentation. But that doesn't detract from the fact that people are willing to go on record and share these type of troubling allegations. And, as you read the story or Jessica, listen to how you recount it, if I'm understanding correctly, this was occurring while they were married, is the allegation?
Correct.
And so
he lived in the house, and it's proven by court records that Michael Madden, the stepson, lived in the house with them, which is a point of contention.
It sounds like it would, generally speaking, fit the criteria for domestic violence, if accurate. And just if we talk about domestic violence for just a moment, and not necessarily this specific allegation, but we see these cases prosecuted so frequently here in Wisconsin, and it's circumstances at times where people, they love each other and somebody doesn't want to report it to the police. And predominantly the cases we see are where the female is the victim, but we do see it the other way around. But it's quite common for domestic violence to go unreported for periods of time for a variety of different reasons, and the challenges that victim may have in reporting that to law enforcement because of family, economic, and other reasons that they just might not report that. And it's sadly all too common here in Wisconsin. We don't always see it taken seriously in the courtroom. One of the things we did in my office was we actually had a dedicated person on domestic violence cases that we didn't always have, because that's how serious we looked at it. And so it's certainly incredibly serious when you see allegations like that, and just the incredible reporting that you and Jim have been doing since I think 2020 now, in just such a short period of time. Your reporting has driven governor's races, attorney general races, the U.S. Senate. It's making a difference in the Supreme Court race. We have fantastic conservative talk radio, but there's not a bigger voice in print than the two of you that we see translated over to talk radio and TV. So we all just appreciate the work you're doing and hope you continue to do it for quite a long time.
And I'm so glad that you're doing this reporting, because Dan Bice sure isn't. Dan Bice, who was perfectly happy to go after Judge Doro's son with he had nothing to corroborate, but stories, and also even went after the other Democratic candidate in the primary or not Democratic, it's nonpartisan, but the other more liberal judge that was running from Madison, and perfectly happy to write a story about that, but he's quite silent when it comes to these allegations.
Yeah, let me comment on some of that. Something that I think we can talk about here that we didn't release in the article is that the day that I called Michael Madden, I left a message on his answering machine, and we find out later that Dan Bice was actually at the kitchen table interviewing Michael when I called, and he heard my voice on the phone.
Wow.
And left the message. And after I hung up, he looked at Michael and said, well, who else has been talking to you? Who else has been calling? And it is interesting that, Bice was supposed to write an article and we haven't seen it yet.
I would have loved to have been a fly in the wall, Jim, when Dan Bice heard you on the answering machine. I think it's hysterical. And I want to make it clear, very, very explicitly clear, these are accusations, right? We're not saying she did this. We're saying people are alleging she did this. And right now we have 2 eyewitnesses, people who said they saw her do this with their own eyes. And we have 2 people who say they were told about it, in a contemporaneous fashion, like around the time that it happened. Now, you bring up Dan Bice, and I think Scarlett made a good point. Dan Bice, set a standard for the liberal media. He wrote a story about Jennifer Doro's teenage son that was based on a pile of anonymous sources. He did a story about the liberal candidate for Supreme Court, Everett Mitchell, who's African American. I bring that up for a reason. Accusing a story about how his estranged wife, now ex-wife, had accused him of sexual assault in the context of a high conflict divorce. I bring up Everett Mitchell's race because I think you could argue there's a racial double standard in the media, that the liberal media were all in, writing about the African American judge and the accusations out of his high conflict divorce based on a single source, his estranged wife. But they are so far ignoring the accusations by named people against Janet Protasewicz. And I question what's the difference.
Jessica, I want to. So one of the things I did after seeing your story, not a ton, but I did reach out to some of my media contacts to see if anybody was gonna, pick up this story, cover it, follow up, and I guess I would just describe the general response I got from them as very tepid, unfortunately, where. It seems that they should at least be asking the Protasewicz campaign for comment on these allegations and see what they respond. And I hope that they're doing their due diligence and digging to see if they can corroborate or find any additional information on these type of allegations, because we certainly see how, Judge Doro and her family was treated in that particular story. And here we're not talking about anonymous sources. These are people that are willing to go on record. And I'll say, I understand one of the, I think, family members that went on record has a criminal history and a past. And I'll tell you, when I look at prosecuting, especially some of the drug crime, Len Bias overdoses, we don't have the best witnesses all the time, but sometimes they make the absolute most credible witnesses on the stand based on how they talk about some of these things and their experiences. And so just because somebody has a criminal history doesn't mean that they're not credible when they testify. It's certainly something for people to factor into, but that doesn't automatically mean what they're telling isn't true.
Well,
Can you tell us more about that?
For the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. The Milwaukee Journal Sentinel is likely not going to cover this or cover it well. And that just shows the bias in the media, papers and.
Well, Eric, can you tell us more about what the reporter said when you called and asked, are you going to do this story?
No, I'm not going to get into the specifics. Just like if I were talking to you guys, I would respect that relationship with you. And I just tried to do a little pushing to see if they would be following up or doing something. And I think, some of them didn't respond, some of them did. And it was just those that did was a very tepid response, unfortunately.
Can you imagine if this was Tim Michaels or Dan Kelly?
Eric Toney.
This would be, or Eric Toney. This would be all over Wisconsin. The AP would have this in every newspaper in Wisconsin. Every reporter would be banging on the door, asking for comment. But of course, because it's a Democratic or a liberal, I should say, a liberal candidate. It's questionable. Are we going to get the media to actually ignite on this?
Well, we've got a second corroborating eyewitness coming down the pike. And there was one reader on my wall who contacted a media outlet. He didn't tell me which one, but he said that they said, we'll only do it if we have more than the stepson saying this. Well, guess what? Jim and I are about to report that we have a second eyewitness, and he's not a member of the Madden family. He says he saw this with his own eyes. And he also says that Judge Madden, he saw injuries on his face, and Judge Madden told him that they were caused by Janet. allegedly. So there's more to come, and we'll see if the media will continue to be able to justify somehow in some wild way not telling voters about this. I mean, Eric, they wrote about, I mean, I don't need to go down this rabbit hole, but like, to be clear, they wrote about anonymous friends of yours writing some email, and that was enough to get into print for the media.
Well, I think one thing to, when we look at the stories that Wisconsin right now has done, I mean, you guys did some of the first stories on COVID related to me. And you did a story on where Tim Michels had a house. You've done stories on Mandela Barnes to Josh Paul to others. I don't know if any outlet has the credibility that Wisconsin right now has, because you've been equal opportunity in your reporting so that people know the news. And I don't know that we're seeing better investigative journalism. And that's why we need to support Wisconsin right now. And I know there are a lot of different ways to do it. Reading the website, you guys take donations and other things like that. But this is really volunteer work, and it's just incredible what the two of you have accomplished in such a short window and being such a leading voice. And so I hope everybody that listens and watches and reads your website understands the impact, and if they've got an ability to support you, that they do.
Appreciate that, Eric. You bring up the Michels house story, which we obviously got criticized for, and we can, we don't have to rehash that, but we did win an award now with the Milwaukee Press Club for that article, and I'm proud of the reporting that we did on it.
Well, and I will say,
you guys, let's talk about,
like, if you guys, I just want to, like, when I see you guys get picked up in the mainstream media, it's usually if it's maybe talking about another Republican, but not when we see a story hitting a liberal or a Democrat. And that's something that I hope will change based on the credibility that you guys have based on your stories. That's what we need to see.
Well, I mean, I'm shocked. I've been doing this for 25 years as a reporter. I've seen a lot of bias in the media. They were biased 15 years ago. It was egregious. But honestly, I've never seen them this bad. Things that I know would have been newsworthy to the old school reporters back in the day. Today, the activist journalists just will not report it, or they wrestle you for the narrative, right? They go into overdrive to somehow try to find some loophole and discredit the reporting. Meanwhile, they're applying a completely double standard to conservatives. So and I think it's appalling.
I want to give another example, actually, that just happened. So as anybody that paid attention to the Attorney General's race knows, one of the things that myself and the campaign would bring up routinely was the staffing of the DCI special agents at our Department of Justice under Attorney General Josh Paul. I was at, I think was it last week, Tuesday, the Badger State Sheriff's Conference, and I heard our Attorney General speak, and I spoke there as the president of our DA's Association. But the Attorney General said that this year alone, they have onboarded about 20 DCI agents alone. Last year, he was saying their total number of agents was about 99 or 100. That would mean they had a 20% vacancy rate that had to be filled this year. And that's something I've shared with some members of the media, and others have as well. And we haven't seen stories about that, where it's certainly something that merits attention.
Eric, how did it feel running for office against that media headwind? I mean, can you describe what Republican candidates go through in trying to deal with the news media?
One of the things when you're part of the story and understand what's actually going on, and then you see what's in print, sometimes it's pretty appalling. Now, sometimes they write fair stories that are on point and no criticism. And I certainly understand many people in our media are doing more with less. And that's certainly a challenge that they face when you see even Gannett and the number of positions that have been gutted over the years that makes their jobs more difficult. But it is incredibly frustrating when you know what the facts are. And I actually had one person in the media where I was trying to get a correction to the story, and they told me that it sounds like it was more incomplete and not wrong, that they were okay with that type of reporting. And it just makes you want to work that much harder as a candidate, because oftentimes you're not going to get a fair shake at times from the media for whatever reason that is. And like I said, sometimes they've written some pretty good stories. We saw some from the State Journal where they looked at staffing with prosecutors at the Department of Justice. Adam with WisPolitics did some really strong stories as well. So there are some people that have, I think, taken a balanced approach. It's not something that we see all the time. But that's a big reason as conservatives, we know that the media is often not going to be helpful, at least the mainstream. That's why we have to unite. We have to stick together. And when primaries are over, that we're all moving in the same direction to win general elections and not focus on who didn't win the primary, because this is what it's about, winning in November or in April with these general elections. And we have to get better at that. And we have to make sure when we're having primaries that we should have them, that we don't part the Red Sea like they did for Mandela Barnes, but that we focus on the issues and make sure that we're not tearing down our own candidates and focusing our fire on the left. Because if we're attacking each other, how much can we complain about the media attacking us? And that's something that the left has done a much better job of here in Wisconsin, where they're not really attacking each other. And so the media is not attacking them, and then we're attacking ourselves. The media at times is attacking us, and the left is doing it. And we have to be better at this.
Let's talk briefly about story 2, the allegations that Janet Protasiewicz used racial slurs. So we have 2 sources on this. They're both on the record. One's on audio and one's on video. They put their name to this, and they both said that they heard Janet, when she was age 34 in 1997 and married to Judge Madden, sitting around the kitchen table using the N-word. The second source said he also heard her using a racial slur to refer derogatorily to Hispanics. One source is Michael Madden, the stepson. The second source, however, is not a member of the Madden family. He did know the judge, former Judge Patrick Madden, for decades. And so he was constantly sort of over at the house with his attorney father. And he told us, I heard Janet use the N-word, and the stepson said that she used the racial slur in the context of cases that were going on in children's court. At that time, Janet was an assistant district attorney for Milwaukee County. She was handling termination of parental rights cases and what are called CHIPS cases. Those are children in need of protective services. So these are some of the most sensitive cases that, you know, a prosecutor can handle. And Michael Madden is alleging that she referred to, for example, parents in these juvenile court cases as the N-word, as lowlifes, terminology like that. Now, as with the physical abuse story, we sent Janet an email and we asked for comment, and we received no response, no denial from her about this. And no coverage from the media so far.
I don't understand why the campaign wouldn't at least come out and at least deny it and say they deny these allegations, get something out there. They have completely ignored all of my requests for comments on this.
You know what's kind of interesting to me, and I think about this in the context of a district attorney, and you know, I had a circumstance where we had a former police officer that just made a slew of racial comments that we had to review, and ultimately, based on a host of that and other things, had to say we're not prosecuting any future cases from this officer because of the challenges that we would face and the credibility and not wanting to put victims through that. But if I had one of my attorneys in my office using that type of horrific language, they wouldn't be working for me anymore. And I think what I'd have to do is look at cases that they've handled to see if there was some type of racial bias by that attorney. And so that would be the question, you know, if the Milwaukee County District Attorney's Office, if they've seen this story, if there's a concern that could have impacted any of the prosecutions that she may have done based on these allegations, because that's certainly a significant allegation to use that type of language. I mean, when we do jury selection, for example, and the N-word has come up in a case, that's something we talk about with our jurors because of how powerful that word is and the impact that it has on individuals, that we have to make sure that is not in our criminal justice system.
So Eric, we did send an email to Milwaukee County District Attorney John Chisholm because he was Protasiewicz's boss when these alleged racial slurs, you know, occurred. And we asked him, are you going to launch an investigation into this to ensure that, you know, the court cases she handled during that time period were not affected by racial bias or animus? And we have received no response. In your opinion, Eric, you're the president of the Wisconsin District Attorneys Association. Do you think that District Attorney Chisholm should open at least an investigation into these accusations.
Well, I think I have to be careful in not speaking on behalf of our entire board, and I don't think that would be appropriate for me in those particular circumstances. But when you look at it in the context of if you had look back to the O.J. Simpson trial and Mark Furman and the language that he used and ultimately the impact that had in that particular case for law enforcement and the context that put it in. And so I think we all understand if we have somebody heavily involved in law enforcement prosecution using that type of language, it's going to have an impact because that's not acceptable, cannot be tolerated. And you've got people on video sharing what they heard. And that would be troubling, I think, to any district attorney if that was one of their former prosecutors.
So you can't talk as the president of the Wisconsin District Attorneys Association because you can't speak for the whole board. I get that. Speaking only as Eric Toney, Fond du Lac County District Attorney, former Attorney General candidate, do you believe that District Attorney John Chisholm should open an investigation into the alleged racial slurs and take a look at Janet's cases around that time frame?
What I can tell you is if somebody came to me with credible information saying one of my former prosecutors was using racial slurs of that nature and they were handling cases, that's something that I'd look into. To see if it's credible, if it happened, and was there any impact that it may have had on potential cases. And the further back you go, the harder that can be to do if transcripts don't exist and if documents and case files aren't there. So that can be a challenge, but that's something that I know I would be looking at.
So do you think Chisholm should look at that? Yes or no?
Well, based on what I would do, I would hope that he would do that.
Okay.
I do want to clarify one thing. I listened to Mark Belling for a little bit this afternoon, and he incorrectly stated that that Janet allegedly used these words while in office and at work. And to the best of what we have is that this all occurred at the home, at the Fox Point home, around the dinner table and possibly outside. But I just want to clarify that point.
Right. There's no allegation that she said this in court or specifically to defendants or their parents. The accusations are, like you said, they'd be all sitting around the dining room table talking about issues, and she would allegedly say these things, talking about the drug wars and that parents of inner city children in court cases were lowlifes. The nexus to the court cases is that she was at that time a prosecutor in children's court. And Michael Madden, the former stepson, is alleging that she was making these slurs in reference to people involved in court cases, in Milwaukee County, including, he said, criminal defendants, and then again, also parents of children who were in children's court at that time.
So I want to bring up a comment that Ed made here. I put it on the screen, and he says, how many people use foul language and racial slurs? And then does making a slur like that make one a racist? Well, I use foul language all the time. I can say that I do not, and nor have I ever used racial slurs. And I do believe that if there is someone making racial slurs, especially when they're working with these people, I think that goes to show their state of mind and where they are and what they think of a certain culture. If they're so flippant about making a slur like that.
I think it's completely disqualifying if she said it. There are two named witnesses, like we said, on audio and video saying she said it. And so minimally the media should be exploring the question. But yeah, I do believe that if you use the N-word, and you're not African-American, I know there's a debate about using that term within the culture. I think that does make one a racist. I think it's a racist comment, has no place in our society.
If a police officer made that comment, if a police officer, even in private, at home, at a party, is recorded saying that would be blown up around the media. And I can guarantee you that officer would most likely be fired.
Well, I think one thing, when we look at law enforcement, prosecutors, judges, where, we have liberties and freedoms, and at times those get deprived based on, lawful ways of doing that. And so that means we have to have people of the utmost integrity in those positions, making those decisions that the public has trust and confidence in. And so that's what, I mean, to use the word troubling is pretty mild here based on the racially charged allegations that I would just hope that is something that's being looked at. You know, I'm not sure that you would see a major announcement that somebody is looking at that, say in the Milwaukee DA's office, if it were to be happening. My hope is that they are looking at it to make sure that we have, you know, a fair system. And Jessica, you brought up the types of cases, especially when we're looking at these child in need of protection and services or possibly termination of parental rights cases. These are circumstances where children get removed from a home. And think about what we see at the border right now and how much under fire the Trump administration, and we saw that it may have been happening under the Obama administration, where a family gets separated from the child. We know how important and significant that is, and these are the types of cases she was working on in family court, and now there's an allegation of some type of significant racial bias, and what could that have had an impact on how she handled cases? That's a fair question.
I think the Milwaukee County District Attorney owes it to the public to restore credibility in this situation, to say whether or not he is investigating, these allegations, as well as the chief judge. So we also wrote Carl Ashley, the new incoming Milwaukee County chief judge, and said, are you taking a look at this in relation to her cases as a judge, although she was an assistant DA at the time of the alleged slurs. Scarlett, I wanted to point out that, you were, in my opinion, a victim of the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, and you were a school board candidate running in a recall, and they wrote an enormous story about your tweets, trying to somehow falsely accuse you of being a white supremacist when you're Latina. And yet, Janet Protasewicz is running for state Supreme Court, and they're not covering these accusations. It's ridiculous bias.
Yes.
It's an incredible double standard.
Yeah, it is. It's ironic. I had thought about that an old tweet in which I had quoted Candace Owens when she had said that the greatest tragedy that had happened to Black and brown people was abortion, and that abortion was responsible for more deaths of Black and brown babies than any white supremacist organization that had ever existed. And considering the millions, the tens of millions of babies that have died, that was sort of something I was referencing, and that made me a white supremacist, the first Puerto Rican white supremacist, I suppose. So that qualified, huge stories in the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. I was written up in the New York Times, but someone who is running for the Wisconsin State Supreme Court is alleged to have used that language and to have spoken so disparagingly of, Black youth. And it's just incredible that this isn't worthy of talking about. But that just shows that the left and the Democrats don't really care. It's something I know very well. They don't really care about the poor. They don't really care about Black and brown people, not on the level of the ideologues. They care about power. They'll do anything to get power, and they will protect anyone to keep their power. I mean, look at Joe Biden. It's very much the same thing. It doesn't matter what racist, incredibly ridiculous thing that comes out of his mouth. He is, he'll be championed by the left because they don't really care about us. And more Hispanics are waking up to that. And I really hope that the news that you have uncovered, I hope it gets out in time to the Black community in Milwaukee so that they know the facts before they go and vote, because they are going to be pressured heavily to go vote, to put in that absentee ballot, and I hope that they realize who they're voting for. They're voting for someone who has alleged to say extremely racist things, actually racist things, and has spoken so disparagingly of the Black community. So don't just do what you're told. Please, examine the evidence, and don't vote for Janet. That's what I would have to say.
Well,
if the news media do not report the racial slur story, and I guess we'll give them a couple days. I get it. We detonated a bomb in the middle of the race, and they're all kind of going, "What the heck is this?" And trying to figure out what to do with it. I get that. But if within, say, a week, they are not reporting on the racial slur accusations, I will say that the Wisconsin media has forever abdicated any credibility whatsoever in the state. They are a bought and paid for arm of the Democratic Party. They should stop posturing and pretending that they're objective.
You know, and when we look at Janet and you see these things that are at minimum reflection on her character and judgment, we see the stories that have been written about her sentencings in some pretty horrific cases of sexual assault, and it's becoming a pattern. And then you look at the comments that she makes on specific issues that are likely to come before the Wisconsin Supreme Court, one of which has pending litigation right now. And there's a Wisconsin Supreme Court rule, I think it might be 6004, I might have the rule wrong, that just talks about if you're a candidate for judicial office and if you're making those type of statements, kind of intimating how you would rule on something, that would be a conflict. And so is the media going to start asking Judge Protasewicz, if these cases come before the court with maps that she's called rigged, or Act 10, which she's talked about, even if it comes to any abortion related issues, is she going to recuse herself because she's specifically said she's running on her values and has telegraphed how she would rule on some of these issues? And it's one thing after another with her that should be incredibly troubling to anybody that is concerned about the rule of law. And that's what makes electing Dan Kelly so important, because of what Janet Protasewicz represents.
So Claire Rudolph said in our comment thread, contact the Truth 101.7 FM. That's actually a really great idea. That's a Milwaukee inner city radio station. There's actually a former police lieutenant who has a show that's kind of interesting. I remember during the state superintendent's race, he actually was pro school choice, and he was going really hard at Underly, the liberal candidate. We should reach out to him, Jim, and ask to come on and talk about what were, these allegations regarding racial slurs. But I agree with all of you. The African American community has a right to know this information. They're certainly not getting it from local TV or the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel right now.
Eric, do you think that now judicial elections, they're now going to be more and more political? Because this is the first time I've ever seen a candidate like Janet run so, like she's running for a political office. And this is a nonpartisan office. I've never seen a judge run as if she's running for governor.
This has the potential to fundamentally change our, at minimum, Supreme Court elections here in Wisconsin. And that should be a concern to everybody in Wisconsin, regardless of which direction you lean in politics, because as a prosecutor, any attorney, anybody that's a party in a lawsuit, you want to be able to walk into a courtroom and know that the judge is going to make a decision based on the facts and the law, not their personal opinions, not putting their thumb in the air to see which way the political winds are blowing, but is going to make a decision based on the facts and the law. It's that consistency and that stability that is the rule of law. And that's really what separates America from so much of the rest of the world. It's the rule of law, not picking and choosing when we enforce it, not saying, I like this constitutional amendment, I don't like that one, that we enforce the rule of law, not our personal opinions or values.
So everybody, Brian Schimming is in our comment thread. He says, hello from La Crosse, my friend.
Hi, Brian.
Hi, Brian.
Maybe we should switch to crime. I would be curious to talk with Eric about his, opinions about the violent crime problems in Milwaukee, the destruction of the MPD and all of that.
Well, I haven't seen where the homicide numbers are trending this year, but we know, Milwaukee has been on 3 straight homicide records. The clearance rate has been, at near or below 50% recently. And that doesn't even include the non-fatal shootings that we're seeing, the other violent crime, the armed robberies. We all know about the vehicle thefts. And then it's the reckless drivings that are spilling across our state. And that's not just to Milwaukee. We saw, we just ran the numbers a couple weeks ago in Fond du Lac County. It was around 2019. We had 15 of these, what we would call felony eludings, like a high-speed chase where somebody's trying to get away from law enforcement. That's tripled to about 45 and 48 over the past 2 years of people that are doing incredibly dangerous behavior, trying to get away from law enforcement. And, there was a recent one, perhaps the most significant and dangerous that I've seen during my time as a DA, where I'll say the person's alleged to have been going about 130 miles an hour on Highway 151. For those of you that aren't familiar, between Madison and Fond du Lac, 130 miles an hour. And the deputy was pursuing, you can see the person then crossing the median to go against oncoming traffic with two vehicles coming at the person and them splitting it down the middle like a goalpost, a field goal, and terminating the pursuit because they're concerned about the danger, getting more 911 calls and having to restart that pursuit. 130 miles an hour driving on county highways. Just the danger that presents to the officer, the public, even the people or person in that particular vehicle. We're seeing this type of behavior escalating across Wisconsin, and our concern is that we're going to see somebody killed as a result of this, a police officer significantly injured. And one of the things we've changed in our office is we're doing a mandatory prison recommendation on these types of cases. And now we can deviate from that in appropriate circumstances, but the level of crime that we're seeing is continuing to be troubling. And I feel so sympathetic to people that have become friends in the Milwaukee Police Department, where they're trying to do more with less resources, less officers. And we're not going to be able to get a handle on this if we continue to see the mayor of Milwaukee cutting the number of police officers and trying to pass the buck on to other people. And I understand there are challenges to Milwaukee, but cutting police officers is not the answer, because that has an effect that radiates across Wisconsin, making so many communities less safe. And we want a safe Milwaukee. We want a prosperous Milwaukee because it's the economic engine of our state. We're going to have the Republican National Convention there. We hope that people are going to get to see the beautiful city that Milwaukee is, but we have to get the crime problem under control in Milwaukee and other areas.
I put up on the screen here, I'm not sure if people can read it or not, but year to date, Milwaukee has 27 homicides. That's an increase of 29% over 2021, but a decrease over last year. So it's kind of, I don't see a pattern there. One thing I'd like to bring up are carjackings. Jessica, I think I pointed this out to you already last year. We got to start looking at the carjacking numbers, because if you take a look, carjackings are up 59% over 21 and 31% over last year. I mean, there's been 92 carjackings, and you think about how terrifying carjackings are. Somebody coming up to you, sticking a gun in your face, pulling you out of your car. You might have a baby in the back seat or something. I mean, those are some of the most horrific violent crimes, and we're still seeing quite an increase on that. I heard about a double chase last night.
Jim, I want to jump in for a second. You just brought up an example. Was it not a couple weeks ago or a month ago in Milwaukee where I think maybe a mom was going into the house, the car was running, somebody stole the vehicle, got into a crash, and the child in the back seat died during the crash that was in the vehicle? I mean, we're seeing horrific consequences of what you just described already.
Right. Last night I heard about a double chase. There was a reckless endangerment, shots fired. They had two chases going on at the same time right around the Glendale border. I think Glendale police and Milwaukee got into a pursuit at the same time. I mean, and I'm hearing from federal agents, I mean, the crime in Milwaukee continues to be out of control. Eric, one thing I want to talk, you talked about staffing a little bit. I was hoping we could touch on prosecutor shortages and shortages of defense attorneys, which is equally important. And, if we don't have public defenders properly funded, we have a huge block in the criminal justice system, right? Because defendants all have a constitutional right to representation. And then, like we saw in Dodge County, literally lost the entire Dodge County prosecutor's office. So what are you, as being president of the Wisconsin DAs Association, what do you think we need to do to address those issues?
Well, to put in context, the issue for public defenders, they're having trouble recruiting public defenders to take those jobs because of the pay, just like we are having, we can't find people to take prosecutor jobs right out of law school because the pay, $27.24 an hour for someone to start as an assistant district attorney out of law school. People aren't going to take those jobs. They'll be a corporation counsel, assistant corp counsel, city attorney. They'll go into private practice. And then we're having trouble on being able to get people to take public defender appointed cases for homicides, sexual assaults, those more serious cases. We're not seeing as much of a problem getting cases appointed on, some of the more lower level crime, at least how it's classified. And, because you can have burglary, which is a class F felony, which doesn't seem like the most serious felony, but imagine having someone burglarize your home and steal that sense of security. Still a very serious crime. But we're able to find attorneys generally for those cases. It's for the serious ones that we're having trouble finding people because of the public defender rate of pay that's at $70 right now, where attorneys just generally aren't willing to take it at that rate. So we're hoping to see an increase in that rate to at least make sure that we can continue to get public defender appointments on those serious cases. Because if we don't get attorneys appointed on those cases, a defendant is often sitting in jail and a victim is waiting for that case to move forward, continuing to be re-traumatized and victimized from that original crime. On the prosecutor front, we have a recruitment and retention crisis right now from, the study that I saw was from about 2012 to the end of 2022, a 59% turnover in prosecutors here in Wisconsin, with about 65% of our remaining prosecutors having less than 10 years of experience. And Jim, from your law enforcement career, I think you understand the value of having an experienced prosecutor, how quickly they can review cases, how they can drive good results and just results in those types of cases. And we're having prosecutors leave to become assistant corp counsel, making tens of thousands of dollars more, going to city attorney offices, other government positions. We've lost now 25 elected district attorneys that have resigned during office since Governor Evers took over, where he's been able to appoint DAs, because many of them are leaving to become judges, and we're seeing a rash of them leaving to become assistant district attorneys, because some of them are making tens of thousands of dollars more to become an assistant DA without the politics involved. And so one of the things we're doing with our Wisconsin District Attorneys Association, we have a criminal justice coalition. So we partner up with the Association of State Prosecutors, the state courts, the Department of Justice, and the Public Defender's Office to provide a white paper from our justice coalition saying these are the key areas we need to address some of these crucial criminal justice system needs. And the public defenders and prosecutors overlap pretty significantly on the pay side, where we're asking the legislature to increase the starting pay from that $27.24 to $35 an hour. So that's a $7.76 increase, where we believe we'll be able to recruit new law school grads at that rate. We also want to see the current pay of our assistant DAs going up by that same $7.76, so that we can actually retain those prosecutors and not see them leaving for other positions. And then we want to see the legislature include the opportunity for merit pay in each year of the upcoming state budget, because some places, you might hear that everybody gets the same raise. It's not quite that way for prosecutors. A couple things have to happen for an assistant DA to get a raise. Number one, it's got to be funded by the legislature. If they don't put the money in the budget, we're not able to give our prosecutor a raise. That's something that has to get addressed in every budget. The second part of it is district attorneys like me, we have to do a written evaluation of the prosecutor to show that they qualify for that raise, because it's merit based. And so some prosecutors might get a little bit more and some might get a little bit less. Some offices might give all of them the same, but it's such an important tool for us to be able to reward those wonderful prosecutors in our office and show them that commitment that they can make a career out of this. And the governor also put something in his budget to increase the DA pay, which is a lesser concern of them. But if we continue to lose DAs that are leaving, that's going to have an impact where there becomes that lack of stability in district attorney offices. I was just talking to one of my DA colleagues in northern Wisconsin that was kind of wondering why would they stay as a DA when they could make so much more money as an assistant DA? And so these are some of the recruitment and retention challenges, but the biggest focus is on our assistant district attorneys and making sure that and hoping that our legislature addresses those areas in the upcoming state budget for the public defenders as well, because we want good attorneys on the other side so cases don't come back on appeal. And I can say I've met with every member of the Republican Joint Finance so far, and many of them twice. And so far, the response has been fantastic. I can't say they've committed to something specific, but I believe they understand the issues. They're supportive of doing something. The question will be what exactly that will look like. Because Jim, you pointed out Dodge County, their office had no prosecutors in there in the DA's office. Sheboygan is down 30 or 40% staffing right now, and we see other offices that are struggling incredibly badly right now.
So you had mentioned that one of the problems if cases are delayed because you can't get an attorney, public defender, private attorney to take it. You said, it's bad for victims. That's 100% true. And you said in Fond du Lac County that people would be sitting in jail. I think in Milwaukee County, in a lot of cases, they're not. And so another ramification of these delays is people are given summons, which are just a piece of paper saying show up for court. They're not even booked into the overcrowded jail, or they're bailed out on very low amounts, and then they're running around the community free to reoffend while that case is pending. And that's also a problem because of the court backlog in Milwaukee County. So over and over again, we have seen cases, including homicide cases, in which the defendant was charged with a crime. It pended in some cases for 1 to 2 years, and they're out on the streets on these low amounts of bail in most cases. And then they're committing new crimes, in some cases homicides. So I think it's obviously incumbent on the system to move these cases through the system. And of course, you're right. Like if you're a victim, and I'm sure the court process is incredibly traumatic as it is, but to have it go on and on and on for 2 years, even in some cases, is really unconscionable. Personally, I support higher pay for prosecutors and public defenders. I mean, some individuals have $100,000 in law school loans to pay off. They can't do that on $50,000 a year. And I think, we benefit also from having people with seniority who have some experience in the system and don't just where there's just not constant turnover in district attorneys' offices and public defenders' offices. So I hope this would be an area that Governor Evers and the Republicans in the legislature could compromise on, perhaps.
Well, I like to say cautious optimism.
I recently heard John Chisholm comment that his average homicide DA, I believe, has 45 homicide case load. And, think about that, Eric, and I know you guys investigate homicides, but can you imagine having 45 homicides as your caseload? And, just a couple, getting subpoenas and all the work involved in even one homicide case. And the burnout rate, how exhausting that must be for a DA to come in and have to deal with 45 homicide cases. Why would you hang around when you could earn a lot more for probably a lot less stress?
Well, and to that point, Jim, one of the things we haven't asked for additional positions as well, but we've told the legislature if it's between positions and pay, we want it all going to pay to make sure that we can recruit and retain the people we have. Because if we can't, if we get positions but we can't fill them, it's like giving a kid a toy on Christmas without batteries. It looks really nice, but you can't use it. And that's why the pay issue has to get addressed. We hope that we'll see positions in the budget as well. But we're realistic. And I know, we hear people talk about the X billion-dollar surplus that we have, but we I think are seeing a lot of that could be from the ARPA one-time COVID money. We don't know what direction the economy is going to go over the next couple of years. And I know our Republican legislature is looking to be responsible to make sure that they're not having to make significant cuts in a future budget. So I certainly appreciate how responsible they're looking at this. But at the same time, public safety is a priority of government. And this is something that needs to be addressed because we're at a crisis point with prosecutors. And Jessica, you brought up, people that are out on low bond and some of those issues. We also have, it doesn't get enough attention right now. On the April ballot is a constitutional amendment for our Wisconsin Constitution to change how judges have to look at cash bail. Because right now our Constitution here in Wisconsin says cash bail is only to essentially ensure that a defendant appears in court. Well, this constitutional amendment would change that to force judges that they shall look at the dangerousness of the defendant, their prior record, protection of victims' witnesses, as well as likelihood to appear in court, expanding the factors that judges shall look at and also putting provisions in to give the legislature the ability to create some statutory language that we can hold some violent criminals and certain types of sexual assault with no bail at all, to make sure that these individuals aren't on our street, but it would give the defendant a hearing as well. So this could make a significant difference here in Wisconsin in keeping our community safe. And so I hope everybody, when you're going out to vote for Dan Kelly, will also vote yes for these constitutional amendments.
I mean, I'm shocked. I mean, I know that I knew this before, but I mean, I find it shocking that judges can't consider dangerousness.
And here's the reality, though. I'll make these arguments in court all the time. Prosecutors across Wisconsin will say, judge, they're facing, mandatory minimum prison or 20, 50 years in prison, or they were fleeing from law enforcement, or the dangerous behavior, lack of ties to a community, substance abuse issues, different things that we would say make somebody a flight risk that should warrant high cash. The problem is some judges in some counties won't consider those factors. And so we have judges in different areas making different decisions on how they're applying cash bond. This constitutional amendment would actually help level the playing field in making sure that we have a unified approach across Wisconsin, because it says the judges shall consider these things, and they're no longer able to hide behind not considering those factors.
When I laugh or smirk, it's because people are writing nice birthday comments like happy 29th on the comment thread. Thank you, BJ Marchant. It's really hard to be 29, It's like, I can't believe 30's around the corner. It's horrifying.
Well, if you guys want, we've been we're going on an hour here. I know Scarlett's got to get going. Jessica, I'm sure you have to celebrate your birthday. We should probably let Eric go. Appreciate the time you spent with us, Eric. It's been great.
Yeah,
Is there anything else that you want to add?
I just want to give a shout out. I was coming from the Dan Kelly fundraiser in Racine, and a great school board candidate here in Mequon-Thiensville, Megan Heinzelman, has let me use her house for the call on my way home to Fond du Lac. So if you're in the Mequon-Thiensville School District, please make sure to vote for her in that election. I think Sergey is running as well. Get out and vote for your other local candidates. So we've got a mayor's race in Green Bay. There's another one in Racine with some good candidates. So we have to make sure we're getting out to support those other great local candidates that are running as well.
Yeah,
Eric,
maybe in our next episode we could talk a little bit more about the school board candidates, because they're getting I know that it's a big important race for voting for Justice Daniel Kelly, but we cannot forget that we really need to get out and vote for our school board candidates, because I know personally many of them, especially in southeastern Wisconsin, and they are doing yeoman's work. I mean, they have shoestring campaigns, they're door knocking, they're putting on events, they're doing everything they can. And I think that we're going to have a really good turnout, and I think that we're going to flip some boards, especially in Sheboygan. Shout out to that board. I'm going to be on Newsmax tomorrow talking about some of the situations that have happened in Sheboygan. And, I'm just really proud of the work that parents are doing. And I think the future of the Grand Old Party, the future of Republican is, parents, and they need to be the party that puts parents and children first. And I think that is the direction that Ron DeSantis is he's really, leading the way. And that is the future of this party. We are going to have to deal with the culture war issues, and we are going to have to, plant our flag and stand with parents and children. And I'm so happy to see states all over the country that are warmly embracing that message, and they are putting parents and children first.
And Jessica, can I just make one last parting comment?
Kind of, but I wanted to ask you a last question.
Okay. Well, I just want to say before I forget, there should be hope for April. And I know people have been a little pessimistic, and we may not win the Supreme Court race in April. I'm hopeful that we will, and I know that we can. But if we don't, we cannot have people say, oh, we can't win in Wisconsin anymore, because things are changing. Things will continue to change, and we're going to catch up to the left on organization and how we get out the vote. And part of that is going to be, I don't care if for you're going to vote on election day, if that's what you want to do, but we have to encourage others to absentee and early vote, especially those that are not always voting and aren't a consistent vote that we know will vote conservative. and we will do these things and we will organize. And Brian Schimming is still new to the role. He's been spreading the right messages. I've seen him across the state, and it's going to be the challenge of making sure that that gets implemented and executed across the state. And that's something that if it doesn't catch up in time for April, it's something that I expect will catch up in time for 2024. We've got a presidential election and a U.S. Senate race that we have to win here in Wisconsin.
Yeah, and so Eric, I just want to say, what I want to ask you is what you see in your future. I want to say just a few things before I get to that question, though. I mean, so, obviously you ran for state attorney general in the fall. It didn't turn out, the way we all hoped. In my personal opinion, I thought you were outspent, maybe 5-1, and that's something that Republicans really need to work on, I think, is sort of not getting outspent by the left. I know Brian Schimming is working very hard at rebuilding the fundraising apparatus of the state party to help with that. And I think personally, you were dragged down by the top of the ticket by Tim Michels. I think with a stronger gubernatorial candidate, I think it would have pulled you over the top, and our other candidate, Amy. That being said, I've told you this directly, that I think you're sort of the rare candidate who actually comes out of a general election loss perhaps stronger than you even went into the general election. I know you faced a lot of attacks from within, the conservative movement at times during the primary. And rather than getting defensive, I felt you always remained a very honorable candidate. You were incredibly transparent. You just outworked everybody else. You went all over the state. If people had questions or concerns, you addressed them directly. And I think all of these sort of attacks, other than maybe a handful of people, sort of vanished, after the primary, and more people started to meet you and see your candor and listen to what you have to say. So I'm going to say, before I ask you the question, I personally hope that you take another shot at state attorney general. We need an attorney general in that office who supports law enforcement. I think that's a position tailor-made for you. And so I guess I wanted to ask you, I think a lot of people wonder, what do you see in your future?
Well, I certainly appreciate all of those kind words. And even I think about, as you were, talking about some of that and some of the attacks, Adam Jarchow in the primary, we got along actually relatively well on the campaign trail and would say hi, shake hands. And Adam made me a better candidate, just like Karen Mueller made me a better candidate. We might have disagreed on the issues at times, and I appreciated having support from both of them after the election, and that helped us consolidate support. And that was a tough primary, though. We were outspent probably about $1 million to $36,000 over the last month or so in advertising, and came out on top in a narrow primary. And then you mentioned being outspent by Call's campaign probably 4 or 5 to 1, and that makes a huge difference. And WisPolitics actually ran an interesting piece a week or so ago talking about spending, and I think it's worth just mentioning here. So one of the things that we're seeing in this Supreme Court race is Janet Protasewicz seems to be spending a lot of her money on TV. That money is going directly into her campaign, and then some of the PACs seem to be spending money in other areas. And so the reason that matters is candidates get a cheaper rate on TV than these PACs do. So even if you have a PAC coming in with equal money than a candidate's campaign on the other side, it's not dollar for dollar on TV ads. And so that's something that makes a significant difference, where, we got swamped down the stretch on ads from, I think, the Call campaign, which probably played a role, but so appreciative of everybody across Wisconsin that supported my campaign and volunteering financially and otherwise. It was just incredible to have that type of support. And I've been humbled is about the best word I can use to describe it, as I've gone around the state for, talking for Judge Doro, Justice Kelly, talking about cash bail, and the number of people that encouraged me to run again. That's very humbling. And it's definitely something that I'm going to keep my eye on, because my fire and my passion haven't gone away. But there are other things we have to do beforehand. And number one is get Dan Kelly elected, get this cash bail constitutional amendment passed, support our local candidates. And I'm also focused on our District Attorneys Association budget and helping try to make this difference across Wisconsin. So those are the things that are on my immediate horizon, and also my office in Fond du Lac County. I'm the district attorney. I was actually supposed to be in a homicide trial this week until the defendant needed more time right beforehand. So I've got a lot on my plate. I'm focused on those things and also keeping my eye to the future.
Eric, judging from our comment thread, there's a lot of support for the idea that you will stay in political life and hopefully one day, run for office again. I mean, you're a very young person. I think you have a bright, career obviously ahead of you. I'm curious, it's sort of a tangent, but what are the takeaways you learned about Josh Kaul from this election, right? I mean, I'm kind of curious,
I think I'm going to leave that one alone. I'm part of a justice coalition. I'm working with the Department of Justice on some things, and I'm going to prioritize public safety and some of our shared interests. And I guess I'll say it this way. We agreed on some of the problems, but we had a vigorous disagreement on what the solutions should be in some areas. And I think I made a lot of those disagreements very public, with the staffing levels for DCI agents, prosecutors, crime lab issues, and things like that in the campaign. And that's something I don't want to dredge up all of that, because I'm focused on our Justice Coalition, our budget package, and there are things in there that I think the Department of Justice could use as well, and trying to have that unified front and make sure that we put public safety above politics right now.
well said.
Very good.
Well said.
All right. I would like to end this. If any of us ever feel discouraged and you wonder, boy, do we continue the fight? I just want to quick share the Fox News headline tonight, right now, that's breaking, is why it's so important. Let me see if I can bring it up here. Look at what this headline is here. Trans Biden administration official says changing kids' genders will soon be fully embraced. That's the kind of sick crap these progressives are putting on us, and that's why we have to stop them.
Yes. We have to go. There was so much I could say about that. A lot I could say about Rachel.
Can we end on a lighter note, though? A rapid
Sure.
question. Who does everybody have picked for their national champion in March Madness?
I don't have one.
I'm not talking because I don't really watch it.
Okay. Well, I'm a homer, and I picked Marquette since the Badgers are in the NIT this year for the first time since like 1997 or something like that. So.
All right. You watch it, Jim?
Ditto.
Jim, do you have a pick?
How about Princeton, seeing that they pulled one out over Arizona today?
Someone said Purdue. I have no idea if that's accurate. But
that's all I got.
Well, just, I just appreciate coming on with everybody. Scarlett, enjoy your vacation in Mexico. You're supposed to be on vacation, not doing these things. But
yeah.
Jessica, happy birthday again. Jim,
thanks, Eric.
What both of you do is just incredible. Keep up the great work. You are making such a huge difference for us here in Wisconsin. It might not always feel like it, but we all appreciate everything you guys are doing.
Yeah.
And the last thing, I guess, would, as I said before, if somebody has that ability to contribute a little bit to you guys, help throw some money their way to make sure they keep doing these great stories and making that difference.
And Eric, thank you for all the hard work you've been doing for other candidates. I'm not sure most of the public understands, literally how much hard work you did for Jennifer Doro and for Dan Kelly. You're going all over the state, event after event. You give up a lot of your weekends to do that. And, I appreciate your work ethic and that, like I said, what you do in the grassroots. So thank you.
Thank you, Eric.
My pleasure.
And happy birthday, Jessica.
Thanks,
Happy
Scarlett.
birthday,
Have fun on the
Jessica.
beach. I'm jealous.
Yes, I know.
And I'm heading to
I
Taylor
have to
Swift.
go on Newsmax in the morning and then Vicki McKenna
Oh, yeah.
in the afternoon, but then I'm done.
So Jim is going to a Taylor Swift concert, and I'm not making this up.
Yeah. Leaving at 3 a.m, and me and my daughter Jenna are headed to Phoenix for the premiere of Taylor Swift's. Jenna thinks it's her last tour. So
That'll be fun.
Yeah.
That is
You'll have fun.
Oh yeah, look.
Yeah, be up at
Enjoy
3 in the
that
morning.
concert.
Yeah, appreciate it, Eric. Yeah. All right, all.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye.
Night.